All right, let's get to the exciting stuff here with the carbon cycle. We've, of course, been talking about what carbon is and how it can move through all these different locations. We've got to put some names on those carbon transfers. So we're going to be thinking about, first of all, what is carbon? We know carbon is the fourth most abundant element in the universe. And it's got this unique structure where it can easily bond with many other elements. So it's a usable element that creates so many versatile different things. And one of the key things that it puts together on Earth is life. So we call carbon the backbone of life. Now, carbon exists in so many places on Earth, but some of the important places we see it is it helps in the atmosphere regulate our Earth's temperature. Because it's making up all living things, that means it helps sustain the food that we eat, plants and animals, and also is a big resource in our fossil fuels that we, of course, use all day, every day. So we've talked a lot about this. You saw this information going around in the carbon cycle game. We can find carbon in every single one of our spheres. So thinking about your right-hand side there, you've got this picture. Just take a look through and make note, what spheres do we see going on in the picture? Hopefully you recognize geosphere, that is down here. Our fossil fuels, our soils, our rocks, that's our geosphere. Atmosphere, we know that is the gases above the Earth. CO2 is our big gas we see with carbon in the atmosphere. Hydrosphere, the oceans. We know that CO2 can diffuse into the water and create carbonic acid within the water, also acid rain. And finally, our biosphere in all living things. We've got the cows here, we've got the plants. If there were a human here, that would also be part of the biosphere. So we see carbon in all four living things in many different forms. So when we think about carbon, it's transferring all day, every day, from sphere to sphere. It's going from place to place. But thinking back to our types of systems, we know that the Earth isn't gaining or losing any of that carbon. It's staying carbon all the time. It's just moving from place to place, from sphere to sphere. So we talked about Earth being a closed system, because all that carbon still exists today. It's just bouncing around or being transferred from sphere to sphere and type to type, never not becoming carbon. So with all these processes we're going to go through, these are all words that we're going to look at and define and think about how this process moves carbon throughout the Earth. What are the spheres that it's going to and from, and also how is that happening? What has to occur to make that transfer? So we'll be defining those along with doing a diagram. So on the right hand side over there, you see this little set of notes for every single sphere, or excuse me, every single transfer. We're going to draw something that fits that definition, show that carbon transfer either out of that object or into that object, and then label the spheres that are involved. So we'll be drawing, we'll be labeling, and putting in some arrows. So the first couple we'll kind of do together, and then the next few you can pause and either grab a Google image or draw it yourself, depending on what you think would work best. So here's our first definition: respiration. You can see from the image here, you might be familiar with respiration. We all do this all day, every day. We breathe out CO2. So respiration is the release of that CO2 to the atmosphere, essentially through exhaling or breathing. Officially, we would say through respiring. And we know that humans definitely do this, and animals, but maybe you weren't aware that plants also respire. They take in energy and they have to release some as well. That's one of the things we do to release energy. So we've got humans, plants, animals, and most bacteria. Whoops, we lost some here. This is how all living things get our usable energy, is through respiration. So we take energy in, make our sugars, our food, and we release that carbon dioxide out. So respiration, a key process for everyone in this room. So we have our definition, thinking about the objects we want to be involved. That is, of course, humans, plants, and animals. So we want to draw those couple things here in our respiration on the right-hand side. So you can draw, you can do what I did and just find a couple images on Google as well. I've got a human, a plant, and an animal. So there's my objects. Pause if you need to get those things or draw those things. Then I want to show the carbon transfer. So we know this is the release of carbon from all these objects, and it's releasing it, CO2, we know that's headed to the atmosphere. So I want the arrows to show respiration is carbon leaving these biosphere objects. So I've got my arrows going out, and that is, of course, releasing, putting my spheres now, carbon from the biosphere, all of these are living things, into the atmosphere. And remember, that is our CO2 coming out of those things. So again, our drawing includes our objects that work for our definition, human, plant, and animal. They're all respiring by releasing CO2 from the biosphere to the atmosphere. So that's one way carbon gets into the air. Here's our next one, decomposition. Things that are decomposing are breaking down after they are no longer living. So decomposition is the breakdown of different dead plants and animals, and they're breaking down into the soil. Now, as they do that, they release carbon to two places, actually, for this particular one. Carbon is getting released to the soil as those particles break down and become part of the soil, but also through the process, we are seeing some carbon also be released into the atmosphere. So we've got carbon going two ways in decomposition. So again, on the right-hand side, we want to show a plant or an animal breaking down. Saw a lot of great animals drawn in your carbon cycle game, so maybe you want to do something like that. Or again, like I did, you could just grab an image from Google. I grabbed this decomposing, rotting pumpkin. That's my object. I'm putting in, or I did put in, those arrows showing the carbon transfer. We have some going to the atmosphere, but also some going down into the soil. Those are my arrows showing where carbon starts and ends. So starts at the rotting pumpkin, heads to those two locations. And finally, I want to label up my spheres. So can't see that one too well, but of course the pumpkin is the biosphere. Going into the soil, that would be the geosphere. And finally, also some is being released into the atmosphere. So your picture should have all three of those things: the object, the arrows, and the sphere that it starts in and ends in. Fossil fuel formation. Fossil fuels are our main fuel source for Earth. Thinking about coal, oil, and natural gas. We find all of those underground, so that means we're thinking about the geosphere for fossil fuels. We know that it takes millions of years for once living things like plants and animals to decay, break down, undergo heat and pressure, and become fossil fuels. So we're seeing in this animation here, over time, those plants and animals get piled up. They are part of a sedimentary rock underground. They get pressed down, they get heated up from being inside the earth, and they can become those fossil fuels that we dig out, mine, and then use for today. So fossil fuel formation is simply the creation of those fossil fuels. Now this is a hard picture to draw, so you might notice I actually put this one in there for you because now we've got two layers that are shown here. We've got our dead organisms, plants and animals, so that is our biosphere layer. So you can label that up. And then you can see here our fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas are forming underneath after those million years of heat and pressure. Those are our geosphere. My tags aren't showing up very good, so I'm just relabeling them here. Geosphere. So even though those plants and animals are dead, they're still part of the biosphere until they've decomposed enough to be fully in the soil or fully a fossil fuel. So here my arrow is going to show that biosphere to geosphere. Make sure I get a good color there to show that change. So again, object, arrow, labels, sphere to sphere. Deforestation. Got the root word of forest in here. Deforestation is when humans are purposefully cutting down trees for farmland or use of the land. So purposeful cutting down of major forested areas. And a lot of times to do that, there's some burning involved. So you can see here going from pure forest and jungle to almost nothing. The trees got removed and a lot of those grasslands got burned. And that releases quite a bit of CO2. And again, that should be familiar by now. We're thinking about things, especially from the smoke, going to the atmosphere. So on the right-hand side, you've got room to draw a picture in there. Thinking about those trees. I'm going to go with green. Maybe get a few trees in there. And then show maybe a few stumps. All right, those trees got cut down and deforested. They're also being burned, so I'm just going to maybe put a flame on one of these. So I'm thinking, I got my objects, showing the arrow of carbon transfer. We're going from the original tree to the atmosphere. And that would be our biosphere from the living tree to our atmosphere, releasing CO2. So at this point, I'm just going to pause so you can make sure you're caught up and you can follow up for part 2 of the video to get the rest of the terms and diagrams.